Hi, hello. Okay, this is going to be a quick-ish video about what's been going on with Shining Armor, what I've been doing, what I'm working on, what I'm going to be working on the next couple days, a couple weeks, and that kind of thing. I've got a little bit of a schedule planned out, so I'll be able to show you everything that I've been working on. I'll try and cut it down so there's not too much fluff, and I'll show you everything that's going on. Okay, so this is the file that I've been working on the armor in. And I've got everything sorted into folders here so I can kind of go through everything one by one and show you. These are the, you probably don't care about this stuff, this is the skeletons. And we'll hide those and you'll never look at them again. So we've got the helmets here. I've got 3 helmets so far, and they look very cool when they're all mashed together by mistake. So this is the full face helmet that I don't believe is in the game yet because I haven't decided what I'm going to do with the T2 and T3 versions of it, but this is here. I'm thinking this is going to go for most of the armor and most of the helmets and most of the weapons as well. The T1 will just be like this, maybe the T2 will be like a little bit more heavily armored, so perhaps for this the T1 could be this, but without the visor here that's on the bottom part. And I've been playing around with that, and it looks pretty good. I can actually show you, if we hide this and go down to unfinished meshes, you can see it's popped up here. We've got these 2 helmets here. One is with the visor up, which is kind of neat. We could do something with that. And we've also got one with the no visor. It's just got this top part. And perhaps for the T3 version, we can add some chainmail coming down off of it, and maybe some trim along here, just add some gold bits, make it look a little bit more fancy. I think this helmet would work better with a lot more heavy looking armor. Maybe something more traditionally high elf looking with the same design language, the long points and the flowing kind of topology, the same way this is going here. You could imagine in your head shoulder plates that kind of go with the same kind of topology and look the same way. It'd be kind of cool to do that. So this is something that's meant for a different set of armor, which brings us nicely into the 2 other finished helmets, which you've seen. We've got this boy here. This is the basic iron armor, or steel armor I suppose, helmet, and this is the upgraded version of that helmet, which just has a little bit more of a owl motif going on, which you see so often in elf armor, and I love that. And that brings us into the T1 and T2 versions of the armor that I've made. The shine is quite intense in Blender, because it is so shiny. So you'll see if I toggle on and off this heavy armor here, it's just the first armor, but it's the T2 version of it, so it's a lot heavier looking, a lot meatier looking, looks nice. This is already in game as well. And also, if I go ahead into the vertex section down here, and the modifiers, I can toggle on and off the female version of this armor. So you can see the waist gets tightened, the hips come out, the chest moves out a tiny bit, not too much as to be scantily, but not so little as you'd be cramped as a female in this armor, because I'm not going for fan service, just going for utility with these armors, which is nice. And this is something that's actually applied to all of the characters, the meshes in the game. So this here is the female mesh, but I tricked you. It's actually the male mesh. And this is the male mesh that we've got currently in the game, and this is all done via vertex colors. So it's basically free because it's all done in a material with data that we already have. And this gets really easily applied to armor. So you'll notice if I come up here to this torso and I turn it on, you'll notice she's clipping, I should say. But if I just turn on this vertex color modifier, boop, it just fits. It just works. It's great. So that's what we're doing with the armor. That's a really cool workflow. And I've done the same thing with the legs. I haven't done the same thing with the gloves and boots because it's kind of not necessary, but it looks cool. And we can do a bunch of other things with that too. We could make fat meshes that are a bit chunkier, or we could use it to damage armor. We could change the topology of the armor based on how damaged it is, so you can make it look dented, or you could just apply things over top of it with the vertex color with the other channel. You could add damage to the armor like rust or cloth tearing. Ryan and I have been working on playing around with that workflow, and I think it's really promising for the type of thing we're working on, because it's minimal work for maximum reward. It's very cool. I'm gonna hide the human character and you don't have to see it anymore. Okay, so I'm just going to enable everything here so you can see the full armor. Now, these legs here, I'm thinking about making them a little more armored, and then for the T3 version, we can add some trim. You can see I've already got this part here that's ready to be goldenized, and that will be quite cool. Or perhaps not gold, but another color that fits with the armor. Or we could just make this into chainmail, and we could add, say, for example, leg knee pads that look quite nice. And that would beef it up just a tiny bit so it looks a little bit more like the rest of the armor, a little more tanky looking. So that's cool. And I'm going to turn the femalishness off on this really quick. Bop. There we go. That also applies up here too. We've got like the female versions of this that work with the torso, which is very cool. But I'm going to turn them off. And as you can see here, we've got the same thing on the legs, which is also cool. And the boots are the boots, and we've got a non-armored version of the boots for the T1 version. Same with the gloves. There's a version of the gloves that just doesn't have that armored bit. Those are both using the same texture, so we don't need to store too much on the hard drives of the people downloading the game. And that's all very cool. So that's the T1 armor. That's basically what I've been... Not T1 armor. That's the first set of armor. That's basically what I've been working on. And a little bit of the second set with this here helmet. So, Ryan also had me make the mesh for one of the altars that we'll find out in the world. I wanted it to make it look like it was sort of just kind of there. There was signs of humans, but it was also just had been there for a really long time. And you can see here, we've got this, I'll destroy this ground plane. We've got these kind of sticks sitting around the side of it, and we've got a little tapestry that goes on top that your character can sit at and put his hands on. And I've actually got the full version inside Mixer. This is the untextured version where it's just random materials applied to it. So let's just go ahead and wait for Mixer to load here. And here we are. This is the altar that I was just working on yesterday. You can see the burlap on the top's a little stained. It's got these mossy sticks on the side that are tied up with more burlap. It's got candles that Ryan has gone ahead and added flames to, which are very cool, sitting on the candle holders. And it just looks like individual slabs of marble that have kind of been chopped out haphazardly and stuck on top of each other and polished a little bit. But they're weathered and they look like they've been there for a while. So that's cool. I thought that was neat. It looks very nice in game, and that's what I've been doing with the altars. I've got a couple other ideas for the shadow altar and the arcane altar, something to do with runes on the top that come out from your hands when you put your hands down on the altar. And the shadow altar would just be something akin to the altars in Skyrim, where there's skulls on it and you put your hands on, and there's little molds on the stone on the top that show that there have been lots and lots of hands placed on this altar over time. Worn and used is what I want them to look like. And I was also thinking it would be really cool if we had big plinths that these all sat on, just kind of a foundation for these to be on, and we could swap them out at will. They could be round, or they could have big altars, or, you know, in Mythic, that huge sword that I had that was surrounded in the sort of Stonehenge looking area, that would be cool. We could have one of those right in front of the big sword, and that could be our shadow altar. Or what else do we have here? The physical altar? I don't believe we've decided what we're going to do with physical. But that's cool. That's a cool idea. So that's this, and that leads nicely into showing you my workflow for the rest of the armors, which I'll just open up here. My coffee's cold. Cool. All right, so this is the iron armor that we've been working on, although I guess it's more steel now. the stuff that we were planning on using in the promotional pieces. So you can see here, I've got what is called smart materials in here. And these have a lot of ability to be able to change the texture and the look of the armor very, very quickly. So if I toggle this iron armor on, which is what I was using in some of the first images that I showed you guys, the iron armor drastically changes the way that this looks. And you can see here, if I turn this on underneath it, it adds a lot of texture to it. Or if I toggle this off, but I leave the steel on, it adds a lot of texture to that. It's really cool. It's a really cool system. This obviously looks like tin foil or aluminum foil, which, well, you know. But it's just an idea of how fast this stuff is to do once we get going. And I've been amassing quite a large library of assets that I've been making. A lot of these smart materials here are just stuff that I've made. Like this is the sticks that we used in the altar. These are a couple of the different armor materials. I've got a chainmail material here that I've made, and this is just stuff I've downloaded. But that's the burlap that I used, that I made myself. This is the log end that I used as part of this smart material. It's all really cool, and it's all really easy to do once you get used to it. So we'll be able to rapidly texture and implement armor as time goes on, which makes this modular approach that we're doing with the T1, the T2, the T3 armor a lot easier to do and a lot quicker, which is really cool. Okay, so now we're going to get into what is more future stuff instead of what I've been doing. So I'm in a drawing page here now, and I'll be able to sketch out for you what I'm thinking. So the first thing I want to discuss is future armors before we go into anything else. We did talk about the ways that we're going to be implementing the current armor in the T3 and T2 versions. I think it's just easier to make the upgrades look tankier and make the materials look better. We could make the cloth underneath either turn into chainmail, which we've discussed, or maybe just like fancier cloth. And you know how so often in images of paladins or crusaders, their armor is draped over with a cloth that kind of has a sigil of their faction? That would be something that we could do, perhaps, as a light upgrade or just any upgrade. Certain armors would definitely benefit from that. So if you look at what is normally a paladin helmet and paladin armor, you get the idea. It's a little Warhammer 40k looking. I'm just sketching this out really fast. But if we look at what is normally just considered paladin armor, you know, with the crosses in the helmet and the holes and all that, after we bothered with making the initial armor, if we went along and added trim along the edges, added little symbols that were to do with whatever faction, perhaps an SA for shining armor, or draped cloth over this part of the armor, and it would just kind of fall down like this, similar to the way that we made the paladins or the crusaders for the RTS that we were working on a while back. This kind of thing would work really well as just like an on top of it upgrade that we could do for pretty much any armor. It would be relatively easy because all you have to do is just cloth physics it out in Blender and just kind of lay it on top of the armor you've already got. And added bonuses to that, all of it would be weight painted with the vertex painting that you can flip between male and female. It would just work out of the box. We wouldn't have to do anything. It would be really cool. And I love that idea for any kind of armor because it really adds to the visual progression stuff. So I've been thinking about that. I've been thinking about the best ways to combine like elfish armor with traditional paladin armor, and you know, you could just go for the elf motifs and make it look really, really cool and make everybody in the entire game look badass kind of thing. You know, owls are cool. Elves like owls. That's just something you could do with paladin armor, right? You could just kind of layer the motifs on top of what you already know, what you already want. Now, that brings us in nicely to the other types of armor that we could do. And I'm just going to bring up the Miro board here. In the Miro, I've been posting a couple sets of armor that I think could be made to look a little more dorky. These kind of helmets here that have the nice eye holes and just big stupid looking foreheads, if we toned those back even more than they currently are, took away a lot of the angry kind of diagonal lines that make it look intimidating and give it a smoother, bigger forehead, they would look great as just like beginner or perhaps guard armor that the player could get and would have decent stats, but man, you look like a dummy wearing them. And I love that. That's such a good contrast to like this kind of stuff that just makes you look awesome and makes you look like a hero, right? And this kind of stuff looks really good for that as well. Just tiny little pauldrons that we could add on even as a tier 2. As a tier 1, you're basically wearing a sweater vest, and that's great. That's what we want. And this kind of thing, we could make that dorky armor look cool. It's optional, but it's there. Like those big feather headdresses that elves have so often. I don't know if we want to do that, but that's an option too. We could even make them kind of like comically big. That would make it so when you're upgrading, you think you're gonna look cool when you put it on, but then you sit there for a while and you're like, man, I look like a dummy. And that's okay. And of course that could be contrasted with like actual heavy armor, actual paladin armor, that sort of thing. This kind of armor would work great with this because it would be so easy to fit elven motifs into this kind of thing. And I think that's great. I think those are my plans for the future armors. I've got like 4 or 5 planned out in my head that are just paladin armors and these kinds of armors, and also, I want to make a couple more weapons in the coming week. I've got a to-do list here. That's plastered to my wall, so I can't take it off right now. But next week's plans are making that dorky armor, and if I have time in the next week, I'll probably make a hammer as well, a battle hammer, because, you know, you got a crusader, you gotta have a hammer. And also, more than likely a staff, because staves are good as well, and we need one of those for magic things, because that's what we're working on right now mostly. So that's cool. A couple other armor ideas in here, but we'll get to them later. The paladin idea, I really can't find a version of it that I think would be cool that is like relatively similar to the version in my head, so I'm just gonna kind of wing it and draw it when I get to it. And that's about it. I'm still not super certain how we're going to do the swaps on the materials in the armor. I think chainmail's the best idea, or just trim. That wouldn't be too hard to do on most armors. I'll give it a try on the new paladin armor, because paladin armor just goes like hand in hand with chainmail and trim. It just looks good. So we'll probably try doing something like that. And that's about it. That's where I'm at right now. Okay, thanks, bye, have a good night!